INGSA 2021, Montreal. Build back wiser knowledge, policy, and publics in dialogue. August 30th to September 2nd, 2021. 4 days, 4 themes. Science advice, society, trust, rebuild together.
That is a very fitting way to open the final session of the day. Where to from here? The next steps for INGSA, award presentations, and announcements. This special plenary will close the Anglophone component of the INGSA 2021 conference. Let me introduce the moderator, Kristiann Allen, Executive Secretary of INGSA and Associate Director at COI2, Center for Informed Futures. Over to you, Ms. Allen.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you live here from New Zealand.
It's such a great pleasure to be here with you. Greetings from New Zealand, where we are coming off of 3 long nights of conferencing. The team here in New Zealand has really turned into our national bird. We've become nocturnal Kiwis. And let me just start, in fact, by thanking our small team here, Grant Mills, Naomi Simon Kumar, who've been with you all night long for the last 3 nights. I also want to thank very much our team who's been helping from Montreal and Ottawa, and in particular, Julie Derumer, Gabriel Gagnon, Alex Bourvien, Brique Pochet, Nathalie-Jeanne Loiseau, and her team. Merci beaucoup. Over the last 3 days, we've had the chance to really review some of the amazing speakers and talks that we've pulled together, and just wanted to thank everyone who's been part of this conference. It's been, well, in fact, having been postponed, it's several years in the making, so we're so pleased how it's come together, and thank you so much. I want to remind you, in fact, that you can review everything, the live sessions as well as the on-demand sessions in the days following the conference on the platform, and that material will be made available, archived on our site as well. So in a moment, I will turn it over to Sir Peter Gluckman to reflect on INGSA's journey. But first, we have an awards announcement. So this year, for the first time, INGSA has included an academic research component in the biennial conference. And this was spearheaded by Professor James Wilsden, who's the outgoing vice chair of INGSA. And James really wanted to be able to offer a platform to some of the emerging voices and novel ideas at the interface of science and public policy. And so that was the thinking behind putting together this year's academic component. And we thank all of the submitters who submitted a poster abstract for the session, and certainly congratulate everyone who was selected. And invite all of you to go and review these posters, the entire suite of them. The submitters really rose to the challenge, turning an academic poster into a digital presentation. And the content that they've provided is really second to none. So we were so pleased to see how well that worked out this year. So without further ado, we have 2 sets of awards. The first are poster winners that were selected by INGSA's reviewers. So these are for Best Poster. And then the second award will be the People's Choice Award, which was based on the votes that were received during the conference this week. So I would like to present these poster winners now, and our winners will receive a certificate from INGSA and will also be featured in our Horizon series and ongoing material from INGSA. So poster winners, stand by, you'll hear from us. They are Alejandra Gonzalez from Colombia for her poster on Science Diplomacy in Emerging Economies, a phenomenological analysis of the Colombian case. Noam Obermeister from the UK, What and How Do Science Advisors Learn? Madiane Diallo from Senegal, Novel Tools and Frameworks for Science Advice in 6 African countries. Alana Westwood and colleagues from Canada, Knowledge Exchange Frameworks in Natural Resource Management. Rhoda Jennings from Ireland, Translating Post-Normal Science into Legislation, the Science of the Precautionary Principle. We also have a People's Choice Award for the most votes on a poster from conference goers. And the People's Choice Award goes to Akoko Sita Kondo from Côte d'Ivoire for the poster Transforming Research Evidence on Rabies into Practice. So again, we congratulate all of our award winners. And I can't help but think, what better indication is there having created a global discourse than when it is formalized into a research niche. So this is a really exciting time, and we look forward to continuing this, this new tradition of academic posters during our conference. So I'd like to turn it now over to Sir Peter Gluckman. And I'm not sure that he needs any introduction, but I'll do that anyway. Sir Peter is, of course, trained as a pediatrician. He was New Zealand's first inaugural Chief Science Advisor and took that position, had that position from 2009 to 2018. He is a member of the Order of New Zealand, the country's highest civilian honor, which is restricted only to 20 living New Zealanders. And in 2016, Sir Peter received the Science Diplomacy Award from the AAAS. And though he's leaving INGSA, he is by no means stopping anytime soon, because just in a few weeks' time, he will undertake the presidency of INGSA's parent body, the International Science Council. So Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Kristiann. In 2009, I was asked by our Prime Minister to be the first Chief Science Advisor. No one knew what the role meant, and I had to write my own terms of reference. Whereas the science community, I think, thought the primary role would be to be a lobbyist for research, I defined the primary role as helping the executive government use robust knowledge to develop better understandings with which to identify their policy choices. At that time, it seemed somewhat revolutionary, and with the exception of a few jurisdictions around the world, that was arguably the general state of play just 12 years ago. Then in 2011, Fukushima happened. In a Nature commentary, James Wilsden and Tateo Aramoto, now at grips in Japan, highlighted the deficiencies of science advice in that emergency. And soon after that, the chief executive of IGSA, the International Science Council's predecessor, approached me to see whether I'd convene a meeting of the world's chief science advisors. And I said no. I couldn't see how that would be helpful. It would be a very small group of Anglophone men, and there were far more diverse science advice ecosystems around the world. Instead, I convened a small, more balanced working party to explore whether a broad-based meeting of academics, policymakers, academy leaders should be held to discuss science advice. And that led to the first international meeting on science advice for governments held in Auckland in 2014. Over 200 people from 40 countries were present, including 20 low and middle income countries. And I particularly remember an impassioned plea from Romain Morenzi of the World Academy of Sciences on the need to build capacity at the interface between science and policy in developing countries. At the same time, that meeting, we had philosophical discussions and conceptual discussions related to science advice from scholars such as Heather Douglas through to the operational challenges of doing the role, such as those presented by Anne Glover, who was particularly refreshingly honest about her own role at the European Commission. The meeting closed with an agreement to establish INGSA as an informal network under the auspices of what was then IGSA, now the ISC. Over the following year, this was formalised with initial funding from the New Zealand government, the UK's Royal Society and IGSA, and later from the Wellcome Trust, who supported the Secretariat for many years. The following year, we started what became an extraordinary series of workshops that INGSA itself ran. The first being in Hermanus, South Africa, in partnership with the Academy of Sciences of South Africa. At that, some 500 applicants from across Africa applied for some 40 slots at that workshop. And many of those who attended that first meeting remain heavily involved. It was soon established that there was a need and an appetite for such work, and INGSA has gone on to run over 45 workshops in 35 countries and in 9 languages. Almost 2,000 academic and policy professionals have attended one of these workshops. Our second global meeting was held in Brussels with the support of DG Research and the JRC, and was attended by almost 1,000 people. And the discussions there started to dissect out different types of evidentiary input in different contexts, from emergencies to foresight, and the distinction between formal and informal advice. And the discussions progressed with the third international meeting held in Tokyo, organized with Tateo Aramoto at GRIPS, where the global issues of sustainability became quite a focus. And now we've just completed a remarkable meeting in Montreal, which raises a number of challenges I shall refer to. INGSA's influence is extended broader. It's respected for its convening power and its role as a network of networks, fostering strong partnerships around the world with organizations such as the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission. As INGSA grew and attracted core support from the Wellcome Trust and the IDRC in Canada, we established a globally distributed operational model through regional chapters in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. These chapters, each in their own way, have been extraordinarily productive. And IDRC has also supported 3 rounds of research, of grants to researchers and policy professionals in the Global South to undertake research projects, which have likewise been a great success, and some have been reported here. This INGSA Knowledge Associate Program is well and truly becoming a leadership institute for the future of the science policy interface. INGSA's leadership in the development of the field of science diplomacy is also noteworthy, having established the Foreign Ministry's Science and Technology Advice Network, FIMSTAN, as a peer community of practice for those working in or with foreign ministries. The interest in the field of science diplomacy has grown so rapidly that we now have a special science diplomacy division, which last convened in Vienna in 2019 with several hundred delegates. Our work in science diplomacy led to me receiving the AAAS Award in Science Diplomacy, and INGSA itself receiving an award for science diplomacy at Science Forum South Africa. Over the past 2 years, FIMSTAN has been very active, including working with the Independent Panel on Pandemic Responsiveness, Preparedness and Response to develop a new draft convention or treaty to deal with the obvious deficiencies in international pandemic management. INGSA also reaches out to the network to develop issue-based reports and expert reviews. For example, at the request of the OECD, we convened experts in social digital transitions and issued a report and policy agenda on well-being in the digital age. And thanks to the extraordinary effort of INGSA members in over 120 countries in the early months of the pandemic, we were able to build a unique online tool to track how evidence was being used in pandemic-related decision-making, and that tool has been used by a number of others. It's been this rapid growth that led to the need to formalize INGSA into a legal entity. It's now an incorporated body with a formal constitution, linked as an affiliated body to the ISC, and with the conclusion of this meeting, the newly constituted governing board, chaired by Rémi Quirion, will take effect. But the bond with the ISC will also be strengthened in this formalization, and that should enable INGSA to be a much more strategic partner in the global collective efforts that are now so obviously needed to face our shared challenges. But there are issues that we've left on for the new board. For at the moment, the membership is free, and we've relied on philanthropy to sustain INGSA. The question of balancing operational sustainability with accessibility to all will need to be addressed. The Secretariat, headed by Kristiann, is small and efficient, but can be easily overstretched as demand grows. And it will be clearly important for the board and the membership to clearly prioritise INGSA's next steps. When I became Chief Science Advisor, it was not the degree of practical and theoretical insight and science advice as there is today. INGSA has made a great contribution to the many developments since that time. A recognition of the distinctive nature of evidentiary synthesis, the development of the skills of evidentiary brokerage, a growing understanding of the criticality of pluralistic input, a better distinction between formal and informal advice, a better understanding of post-normal science that engages society on issues of high public interest. And that in that time too, we've seen the challenge of disinformation and the loss of trust that accompanies it. We now see the business of science advising as a complex ecosystem with multiple players, but in most countries, the ecosystem is still fragmented with missing elements. COVID has highlighted many issues about the interface between science, public policy, and politics, between science and society, and broadly in diplomacy. It's the biggest natural experiment in the role of science and policy making the world has ever seen. But the issues that it illustrates are manifold. Who has access to give advice? Is there a plurality of disciplines providing input? Has scientific hubris and competition influenced what advice is heard or delivered? Has political ideology obscured or influenced advice? How often has we heard the political claim, we are following advice, when they've manifestly co-opted that claim to advance a specific agenda? The pandemic has made it easy to see how, in some countries, science was strategically used, misused, or ignored in relationship to the political cycle. COVID has brought the tension between evidence, values, politics, and information sources into sharp focus. There have been examples where science has become politicized and rejecting it has become a badge of political identity. Disinformation abounds, the media are polarized, and this can undermine public confidence in scientific knowledge. Globally, it's easy to see that the multilateral system failed. Yes, it was an extraordinary collaboration between public and private sector science and innovation to produce vaccines at an unprecedented pace, but that was built on years of prior research. Vaccine nationalism abound, inequities are manifest, and the WHO and UN system has been demonstrably inadequate, especially in the early days of the pandemic. Those of us interested in the complex interaction between science, policy, and society need to reflect. The lessons from the pandemic will have to be extrapolated to other crises and to the more usual business of policy making and decision making. Only a handful of countries have yet used their experience in COVID to reflect on their own needs and scientific advice. It's also raised a number of ethical issues, which are subject of a joint working party with ISC on ethical guidelines for scientific advice in emergencies. I'm often asked which countries have a good science advice ecosystem, but there's no singular system to recommend. Each system must be appropriate to context, culture, and constitution. But given the broad range of needs in scientific advice, few countries have all the ingredients. Given the increasing lack of challenges, an increasing number of the challenges lie in the social space and in the multilateral space, the lack of academically active social scientists within advisory ecosystems on one hand and within foreign ministries on the other hand are a particular concern. The failure of the multilateral system to have a coherent input of science into global policy making is also a concern. In the case of climate change, we've had to build an extraordinarily complex and exaggerated system. The abandonment of the nascent science advisory system in the UN Secretary General's office, which was poorly conceived and implemented, was perhaps understandable. However, rather than seeking a better solution, it remains a vacuum. Obviously, some UN technical agencies have scientific input, but others have highly variable input. And there are big questions here that need to be addressed, and INGSA has a role. But after 12 years of working in the interface, there are a few considerations that I think merit particular focus by our community. The first is to acknowledge the changing view of robust evidence in a contested knowledge space. What we know as science, even in its broadest sense, lives alongside other knowledge systems that influence how people live their lives. Furthermore, it's critical that in the process of evidentiary synthesis, there's an appropriate plurality of inputs, and that brokerage does not inappropriately filter that analysis. As I pointed out 7 years ago in Auckland, evidence is a political construct with multiple sources of information that can be selected and labelled as evidence. Science is a set of processes that aim to provide a provisional understanding of the world around and within us, but many other factors into decision-making. There are big challenges of how scientific disciplines sit alongside other forms of knowledge, and the dynamics of values and biases inherent in the context in which advice is offered and received. But we must also consider that we now live in a world of contested facts, which conflates biases and values in new ways, creating even more challenges for the work of science advising. Arising from this is a question that Dan Sarowitz posed so eloquently in his outstanding conversation with Sabina Leonelli earlier today. Institutional trust and the acceptance of evidence are closely linked. The discussion of science advising has just two components in each of two dimensions. First, compiling and synthesizing evidence, and the process of brokerage represent sets of actions and choices guided by skill and interpretations. That's one dimension about which much has been written and said already. But the people undertaking these efforts and those receiving the advice also operate within structural constraints that represent the institutional dimension. And in this, the nature of trusted institutions is changing. Institutions need to evolve to sustain that trust, and that will be an ongoing challenge for science advising. As the nature of science challenges and the knowledge environment changes, and citizens have access to knowledge in ways that they've never had before, one area of inquiry stands out as needing development: transdisciplinarity. It has the property of framing complex questions from multiple lenses from the outset, of recognizing the entanglement of different knowledge systems and values, and therefore champions co-production and co-design from the outset. Yet the structure of our research systems are poorly designed to accommodate it, and that has implications also for our business of science advising. It's clear from my own work in New Zealand and then extrapolating to the global arena that we've largely missed a key dimension of science and evidence advising. That is better consideration of how advice is sought and received. Yes, we've made some progress in sensitizing and upskilling the so-called demand side, but there are a broader range of issues. Recently, Anne Bardsey and I wrote a report pointing out this range of cognitive biases and political attitudes that can limit the reception of robust advice, even in relationship to detailed risk assessments. We need to understand these biases and how to confront them and counteract them. This too reflects on how societies reach decisions on the complex transformations they are going to face. These are but some of the issues that need to be confronted. INGSA has a key role in identifying, linking and sharing expertise across jurisdictions, in developing expertise, and in helping to elucidate the systems and structures that can assist collective decision-making. The nature of the relationship between science and society is clearly changing. So too is the way public policy is made. INGSA has already had enormous success focusing on capacity building within the science community, but it's also been influential in helping to build and structure the interface from the institutional perspective. I would suggest that its challenge is now to focus more on the policy and political communities and to address head-on the challenge of disinformation and the misuse of knowledge in the political community. And as a final provocation, one matter I muse upon from time to time is, did we get the name INGSA right? The primary reason I've never explored it is a matter of the high brand recognition INGSA has. But in English, science and government can both be narrowly interpreted to mean natural sciences and national governments, when the intent was and remains to better link all types of knowledge to decision-making and governance at every level of society, from local to global. For that's where we have filled a critical gap in both discourse and capacity building, and continues to have a critical role to play. With its more formal structure, the strengthening of regional chapters and thematic divisions, INGSA is well positioned to make a real difference. The transition to an elected board with a stable secretariat is important. I thank and congratulate Rémi in taking up the presidency, and I'll leave him to announce his newly elected board members. But before that, I want to thank all those who've helped get INGSA to this point. In particular, Heide Hickman from the IFC, the Wellcome Trust and the IDRC, who provided the necessary report, to Kristiann Allen, Grant Mills, Naomi Seaman Kumar, Felicia Lowe, and Lara Cohen, members of our secretariat, members of our establishment groups and our chapter committees, for all their voluntary efforts. They should all be deeply proud of their work. And now it's over to Rémi as your new president. Thank you very much.
Merci. Thank you very much, Peter, for this superb overview of INGSA accomplishments since 2014. Truly amazing, and in large part because of your commitment and passion for science advice everywhere in the world. You certainly are the global face of science advice. If INGSA is where it is today, it's mostly because of you and a team of devoted partners, chapter and division, as well as long-standing sponsors like the Wellcome Trust and IDRC here in Canada. I have enormous shoes to fill as incoming president and will not succeed without your continued help and support, and that of all members of our community. Merci encore pour tout.
Thank you again for everything, and good luck for the ISC Council presidency.
And we now hope to be able to do even more in future years. I would now like to summarize briefly some of my main priority over the next couple of years. It's still certainly very early days, and it will evolve following discussion with our newly elected board and input from our membership. I'm counting on all of you. As one of the organizers of the meeting in Montreal, I also did not have time to digest and incorporate the rich discussion that we had over the past 3 days on topics just mentioned by Peter, such as transdisciplinarity, ethical guideline and science advice, optimal foresight, trust and transparency in period of compressed time and emergency, as well as more effective public engagement and co-production of advice. This is just to name a few of the thematic of the session that we had over the past 3 days. Like probably many of you, I need a bit more time to reflect properly on all the discussion. As of today, will have 3 major priorities. First, governance and long-term sustainability, including continued capacity building and finance. Second, the role of cultural and linguistic context in the delivery of truly effective science advice. And third, how to deliver impactful and effective science advice at different levels of government, from global to national to regional and local government, including citizen engagement. we need to consider how to link and integrate better our effort at all levels. Let me address the latter two first, and for the sake of time, I will briefly summarize these two, but a more detailed version of the talk will be posted on our website over the next few days. Cultural and linguistic context of science advice. I have been interested by this topic since the creation of INGSA. I have made it one of my priorities to ensure that cultural and linguistic contexts are taken into account in the way we approach science advising practice. Language and culture affect our interpretation of the world around us, sometimes somewhat unconsciously. And even if science is by its nature universal, the way evidence are assembled, conveyed, and understood by recipient is culturally embedded. We all need to recognize this to improve the global impact of what we do as advisors. I have observed significant difference in optimal way to deliver science advice almost on a daily basis, here at home, in Quebec, and in Canada. This applies to elected officials, to high-level policymakers, and I should add, to the media. The same comment, the same advice made public generate very different headlines in the French press compared to the English press. So we have to take that into account. This has never been as clear as since the beginning of the pandemic. Also clear to me that overall, science advice mechanisms are better established in English-speaking countries. One example, during the pandemic, experts having frequent exchange on the management of lessons learned from the pandemic in English-speaking country, while that occurs very rarely in French-speaking country. Could this be due to the long-standing organization such as the Commonwealth? Or again, is it different cultural context? In any case, and on the basis of more than 5 years of discussion with partners in various countries in Europe and in Africa, I will announce at the meeting tomorrow the creation of a French network on science advice under the joint leadership of the Fonds de Recherche du Québec and INGSA. Stay tuned for more detail, but will certainly involve European and African countries, in addition, of course, to Quebec and Canada. I truly hope that this initiative will stimulate the creation of other culturally and linguistic-based networks working hand in hand with our geographically based chapter. Now, few words on science advice at different levels of government, from global to local and back. This critical topic was discussed here in few sessions. The consideration of context is also important when giving science advice to different levels of government. They are each institutionally bound in different way, and this affects how they see problem and possible solution. This is true at all levels, from global to national, regional and local city government. Even if we know this, we don't always take it into account, which can lead to frustration on all sides. In Canada, health and education-related policy and rule are under provincial jurisdiction. The pandemic really shone a light on the sometimes vast difference between what was suggested at the national level and the decision and action of the provincial government. It too often led to confusion at the level of local city government, their staff having to operationalize the decision made by higher level government. Civil servant and elected official of local government have to implement higher government guidelines and rules without often having the benefit of strong internal capacity in science and science advice. Of course, local government can partner, and they do, with academic experts, but this is not sufficient for optimal, timely response and implementation during a crisis like the COVID-19 crisis. We in Quebec, at the Fonds de Recherche de Québec, established strong link with the city of Montreal, as well as few others in the province. The aim is to increase capacity in science advice at the city level. Mayor Plante referred to our partnership in our opening remark on Monday. Can we go a step further and even have chief science officer and the like in local government to ensure long-term continuity of expertise? What are the existing model and best practice for this at the global level in other countries in the world? Through INGSA and its partnership with other global organizations, we can learn and share practice and increase capacity. After all, local government are often where the action is. Just think about the climate crisis and many of the objectives of the Sustainable Development Goal. At INGSA, we can do more to help identify gaps and work with municipal leaders and establish experts to increase internal capacity in science advice and delivery at the local level. Local level being the closest to our fellow citizen. Talking about citizen, I'm hoping that INGSA will consider developing a very ambitious strategy aimed to promote their greater engagement in our organization. As James Wisdom reminded us yesterday, INGSA was established to some extent with that in mind. Moreover, strong public engagement in science advice circle back to higher level of government and can contribute to fight disinformation and loss of confidence in science and science experts. This is a key issue that was just raised by Peter, and I fully agree. Hence, trust, transparency, honesty, and partnership, just few key words that we need to put into action and engage more directly with our citizens of all age group and of all culture. Finally, let me address the priority of governance and sustainability for INGSA. This may seem rather pedestrian and even somewhat dull of a topic to conclude with. However, I will argue that this is key to the future of our organization. Our new constitution provides for sound and open governance, which will help bring it and develop a focused strategic plan. Luckily, thanks to the work of the New Zealand head office, we have made major progress over the past few months, specifically on the INGSA new legal constitution. INGSA new governing board now take effect, and today I am very pleased to announce the result of the recent election by our membership of 3 vice president positions. The first one, Professor Claire Craig, as inaugural vice president, evidence. Claire is from a College of Oxford in the United Kingdom, long expertise and experience in the field of science advice, and she'd be a great champion in terms of developing strategy as related to evidence in the post-pandemic world. Second, Professor Binyam Sise Mendishu from Ethiopia as inaugural VP capacity building. Young star, and we need to include more and more the new generation to help us to develop the world of tomorrow in terms of science and science advice. Very pleased to have Binyam on board with us. And third, Professor Soledad Quiroz Valenzuela from Chile as the inaugural VP policy. And again, Soledad had a great expertise in Chile and also in Latin America to develop network on science and science advice. And I must say that I really look forward to work with them and with others to establish the plan, strategic plan for INGSA. Please join me in congratulating them over a new governing board executive and officer. I also wish to thank the other candidates who agreed to have their names stand for election. You can be sure that you are not off the hook, and we will call you and call on your expertise in the very near future. In addition to these elected positions, the INGSA board also includes non-elected positions, which would help us strengthen the voice of our chapter within the structure, as well as create a formal link to the Global Young Academy. It also gave us the scope to focus on key geography, such as small island developing state, and on key issues represented by our special interest division. Over the next few months, I will work with the new board to develop a robust strategic plan aimed at extending and amplifying INGSA reach and relevance, which goes hand in hand with ensuring its sustainability throughout diversified partnership. You as member will be asked to contribute at various phases of development of the plan. It must be our plan, not my plan. With our small but highly effective head office led by Kristiann, Allen, and Grant Mill in Auckland, with our new board member, and with the diverse and enthusiastic INGSA membership, I look forward to INGSA continued success and new opportunity. Today, 10 years ago, to this very day, I was appointed as Quebec chief scientist. Listening to discussion over the past 3 days, it's almost like back to day one. So kind of raising a bit of anxiety, but at the same time, a lot of enthusiasm, and I'm really excited and I look forward to work with all of you. Merci beaucoup.
Many thanks to Kristiann Allen and Peter Gluckman, and congratulations to Rémi Quirion. We are very excited to see what the future holds for INGSA. We would also like to thank everyone who has contributed to make the first 3 days of the conference a success. Join us tomorrow for a very special day entirely dedicated to the practices of science advice in French-speaking countries. Plenaries and panels will be in French. However, we will be offering simultaneous translation in English. Do not miss this. À demain.